Alright, and welcome back to Zero Cool Gaming. And today we're going to be doing a review of a game called Prince of Persia, The Forgotten Sands.
This place is very familiar.
Who are you? What have you done?
You ask as if I were a ruffian, a wanderer with no place in this palace. Know that I am a son to King Shahraman, and brother of Prince Malik, who rules here in our father's name. I did not come here seeking a mythical army. I was sent to study alongside my brother, that someday I might be as great a leader as he is. This territory was once the...
Now, I don't know if I've covered this game before. I may have. But really what I'm doing is I'm just going through my game library. In whatever order they show up in is the order that I'm reviewing them. And I do have, in some cases, more than one copy of different games. Meaning some games I have, on both PC and PlayStation. Things to that effect. So there'll be a few games that I end up doing more than one review over, just because of the nature of the games that I own and the doubles in that respect of those games that I own. So I may have already covered this game. At the very least, I think I'll do a better job of it this time. So what is this game about? Well, it starts out with a son of a sultan, I believe, or a king, who's sent to train with his brother, who is the king of another nation, on how to be a good leader, things to that effect. And when he shows up to begin this training, he finds that his brother's palace is under attack by enemies, and his brother himself is retreating because they're losing. And the reason they're losing is because of sheer numbers, truly. The enemy force is a much larger force than his brother commands. So he makes his way into the palace. And then you start the game itself. Now this game is more focused on fighting and different styles of attacks, different abilities. Well, I guess really abilities isn't the way that you would word that. Different skills, attack skills that you're going to learn throughout it, than it is with the different puzzles, environmental puzzles, where like Prince of Persia, Sands of Time was more focused on the environmental puzzles than it was with the fighting and the different fighting tactics and skills that you learned along the way. With this one, there's a lot more emphasis on the fighting than the environmental puzzles. There are environmental puzzles. You do have wall running and things to that effect. You have all the same skills in that respect and all the same type of moves. There's just not a heavy focus on that aspect of the game. The environmental puzzles are not incredibly difficult. Not that some of them aren't pretty cool and interesting. There are a few along the way that are, but they're pretty spread out, and most of them are pretty straightforward. Also, another part of this game is the story itself. The game itself is not very long. I mean, it's, 5, 6 hours. If you're playing it through for the first time, it might take you 10 plus hours, just because of all the times that you'll die, go back and start again. But realistically speaking, it's a 5, 6 hour game, and almost 2 hours of that is the story, with another 3 hours of gameplay. So it's not a long game by any stretch of the imagination. So, like I was saying, the story on this is he makes his way into the palace. He works his way through the enemy soldiers. He's wondering about, whether or not his brother's forces are going to win. At some point, when he gets to the treasure vault, he realizes that the palace is lost. And at this point, their best option is to retreat, so that he can save, what people are left and rebuild the kingdom later. But that's not what his brother wants to do. When he finally does meet up with his brother, he meets up with him in the vault itself, King Solomon's vault. And his brother wants to release the army of King Solomon. He tries to talk him out of this, but he refuses. And he uses the key that he's been holding and has probably been passed down for thousands of years at this point, to release that army. And once he releases the army, he realizes that he has little to no control over it. And the King Solomon's army is the army of the undead. And they rise up out of the sand and they kill his palace guards by turning them into sand sculptures. And then the vault itself begins to collapse around them. The prince has one half of the key, and his brother has the other half of the key. And as he's escaping the vault, as it's collapsing, he finds an odd doorway that looks like water. And upon entering this subdimension, which is the easiest way that you could define it, he finds a pool of water where what looks like a woman springs from. And she tells him that she's part of the Jinn. And Jinn obviously live a lot longer than humans do. They also live in a different dimension. And she tells him that the army of King Solomon was not his army, but an army that was sent to destroy him. And, thousands of years ago, the Jinn helped him to imprison that army so that they wouldn't destroy the entire world. And she tells the prince that if he is unable to find the other half of the key and do the same, which is re-imprison the army, that the world will fall as a result of its release. And she also tells him that there is a powerful leader, and he's a member of the Ifrit, which is a type of demon, I'm guessing. And if he was to see him or meet up with him, that he needs to run, as he cannot defeat this thing. And of course the prince is a little set back by all of that. But he understands what he needs to do. He needs to find his brother. He needs to get the other half of the key and then take it back to the collapsed vault and reseal the army within the mechanism that released him. So, lots of things to do, and a very short time to do it. And because she knows that time is short and fleeting, she gives him the power of time to help in his endeavor of completing this task before it gets too big of a task to be completed at all. So as the prince continues his trek through the palace to find his brother and reunite the two halves of the key, he does see Ifrit, and he sees Ifrit creating more and more powerful combatants. And basically the story gives reason as to why the enemies that you face as you move through the game get stronger and stronger, which shows you how that's happening. So he continues to fight his way through, and he ends up closing the gates as his brother has asked him to, and raising the drawbridge so that the army can't escape the palace itself. But he also hears some pretty disturbing things from his brother, like he no longer cares about his soldiers or his people, and he's enjoying the power that he's gaining as a result of taking on and destroying the army of the undead, which is not the same experience that the prince is having. He doesn't get stronger in that respect by destroying this army. And the next time that he enters the alternate dimension to speak with the Jinn, she says that it may be possessing, the power of the army may be possessing him and changing him irreversibly, possibly. And the reason that he isn't feeling the same effects by destroying the army as he battles his way through them is probably because of the initial power that she gave him over time is protecting him from that type of possession. So eventually he works his way through the palace and the now activated palace defenses that his brother activated, and he meets up with his brother, and he asks him to give him his half of the medallion, and of course he refuses and runs off after accusing him of treason. And this upsets him, of course, because he's not trying to be treasonous. He just wants to re-imprison this army of the undead that his brother released before it spreads out into the world. So he makes his way to a device that's supposed to divine the future, and he realizes that regardless of the complexity of this device, it's pretty useless because it wasn't able to predict that the initial army was going to attack. Neither was it able to predict that his brother would release the army of the undead as he did. And as he continues his trek through the castle, eventually Ifrit takes notice of him. And while it tries to prevent his progress, the cutscene pays more attention to the stone on Ifrit's chest than Ifrit himself. So there's something important about that stone. We just don't know what it is yet. And the prince notices it as well, but he doesn't know what it is either. But he continues his trek through the palace, and he realizes that Ifrit is headed toward the I don't remember what area of the palace he said he was headed for. The throne room, that's right. And he heads himself to the throne room in an effort to protect his brother, because he realizes that Ifrit just isn't after one half of the medallion, he's after both halves. And he thinks that since his brother is probably headed toward the throne room, that this creature is also headed toward the throne room and after him. So he starts to make his trek toward the throne room as well. So the prince eventually makes it to the throne room, and he sees his brother fighting Ifrit. And eventually his brother gets knocked through a window, presumably to his death. And then the prince decides that he's going to try to fight Ifrit and kill him, and revenge for his brother. And as the battle continues, you slowly knock his health down, blah blah blah. And then once Ifrit is weakened, the prince's brother rushes in and makes the killing blow on Ifrit himself. As a result, Ifrit ends up possessing his brother. And when he makes his way into the dimensional world to speak with the Jinn again, that's exactly what she tells him. That's why she warned him not to fight it. Because you can't kill it with normal weapons, period. The only thing you'll succeed in doing is getting yourself possessed in the process. And of course the prince doesn't want to hear any of that. He's convinced that he can save his brother. So he leaves. He's supposed to be going to the Tomb of Solomon, I think. Or the Jinn City. The Jinn City. To retrieve the weapon that can actually defeat this demon. Because he saw that the part of the medallion that his brother had when his brother killed Ifrit broke, so it's no longer usable. But eventually, as he continues to track his brother through the palace, he sees his brother turn into a demon, kind of like Ifrit, a little different, but essentially the same thing. And it's at this point that he realizes that he's not going to be able to save him. He's no longer human. He watches his brother kill his own men, continue to fight against the armies of the undead, but seemingly he doesn't care who he kills at this point. And he knows as the demon continues to overtake him, eventually that demon will be able to control those armies. So the demon eventually knocks him down to the ground in a fight that they have, his brother possessed by the demon anyway. And he decides that he's going to make his way to the Jinn City and try to retrieve this sword. Upon doing so, of course, he finds that the entrance to the city is heavily guarded with defenses, everything from fire beetles to staircases that try to kill you. But you work your way through all of that, and as you get closer to the bottom, you find another portal into the alternate dimension where the Jinn is. And it's at, basically this part in the game where it starts to get a whole lot more difficult, truly. Not just the puzzles that you're solving as far as environmental puzzles, but the enemies that you'll be facing on a regular basis are much more powerful than they were at the beginning of the game. And you'll face a lot more of the larger creatures instead of just facing them as mini bosses. Now there are multiples of them that you'll have to face in combination with each other. So, like I said, as you progress through this game, it does progressively get harder. You do gain more abilities, which is a good thing. Your life bar does increase, which is another good thing. As well as your the time in which you can, freeze things, the time in which you're allowed to control water. All of your different abilities, you basically add time to them. But at this point you realize that you don't have a choice but to kill your brother who's been possessed by this thing, because it's no longer your brother, truly. And as a result of coming to this conclusion. It's not like you want his palace or, to control his domain in any way. It's just you need to put an end to this undead army that he released out of ignorance. And that's essentially what the Jinn told you to begin with, is that because humans have forgotten what this army was the reason that he released it in the first place. Because they didn't keep accurate records of their history and the history of what caused this army to be brought into existence in the first place. And that's actually a tenet of Islam, truly. They have a tendency, because of their religious beliefs, to destroy all records of history. And we see this when they violently had their civil war in Egypt. When they had won that civil war, they went around to all the museums and they destroyed all of it. They just blatantly destroyed all of it. Thousands of years worth of history, the little bit that we were able to retrieve, recover, and restore from all over the world that had been brought back there, they destroyed it all. And for a couple of decades before this point, Egypt had been going around the world asking for their relics and artifacts to be returned to Egypt. And then as soon as they got most of them back, this is what they did with them. They destroyed them so that there would be no accurate record of history remaining. And that's a direct result of Islam, truly. It does this in every country that it's taken over. It destroys the history of that country so that there can be no accurate record of it. And then they can just claim whatever they want. They can make up the history, which is what they do repeatedly. And there's no way to really disprove the lies that they create as a result. It's a common thing that they do. It is a tenet, like I said, of their religion to do this. And those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, which is why they repeat history over and over and over again, because they have no record of it to prevent that from happening. So the prince eventually makes it back to the alternate dimension where the Jinn is living, and again tries to have an argument with her about trying to save his brother, but eventually comes to the understanding that it's not his brother anymore and there's nothing he can do to truly save him. And he commits himself to finding the sword and doing what must be done. And when he does retrieve the sword and then returns to the alternate dimension again, the Jinn that's there puts herself within the sword so that the sword will have the ability to kill the demon that his brother has become. And then they work through the palace and make their way up a tower to have their final battle. He has the final battle. He destroys the crystal on his chest, and that reseals the demon, destroys the army. And what's left is, of course, his brother and the sword, which is now lifeless, meaning that the Jinn needed to sacrifice herself in order to destroy the demon that was released. So he eventually makes his way back through the Jinn city and returns the sword to its resting place. And then he has to return to his father's kingdom and explain to him what's happened to his brother and his brother's kingdom as a result. And that's the end of the game, the end of the story. What I did want to talk about, though, is one of the aspects of this game that I find quite disturbing. And it has nothing to do with the gameplay or the game itself, but the PC version of this game requires a permanent internet connection in order to play the game. And it is made by Ubisoft. And because of this, this is one of those games that will require a subscription service in order to be able to play it. Even though you own the game and it's a single player game, none of that matters. You now have to pay in perpetuity in order to play it. And eventually, even that will go away. Just like we saw with PlayStation recently, where they ended their PlayStation Play, where they were allowing you to purchase movies to store on your PlayStation and then play them whenever you wanted. Once they ended that service, now all of those movies that you bought and paid for are gone as well. It doesn't matter. And this will be the norm going forward unless we do something about it. Games like this one will eventually just go away permanently, because the servers that allowed you to play it, with a subscription of course, will eventually be shut down, and these games will not be playable from that point forward. Just like none of those movies will be yours from that point forward. Just like all of these subscription services, in truth, eventually, when they shut down or they upgrade or whatever, everything that you had purchased with them is null and void. And this is becoming the norm because people are allowing it. And as long as it's continued to be allowed, this will be the result. And that's what has to change. We have to protest this. We have to sue these companies. We have to force our government to create laws that protect us and our purchasing rights for the products that we purchase. Otherwise, we will have no right to any products that we purchase. And they can be taken away from us whenever they feel like it. And you will have no right to say otherwise, unless you stand up for your rights now. And unfortunately, I don't think people are going to. They just don't care. And they won't care until it costs them so much that eventually they start to care. And by then, there'll be so many laws protecting this insanity that it'll be impossible to break them all down and get them all removed. And that's truly what they're hoping for. Do you think these companies didn't lobby your government officials, your politicians, to have these laws created to protect them when they take your products away from you? They absolutely did. That's why they can do it. And that's why there's laws in existence currently that protect them when they do so. This has to change, people. This cannot be allowed to continue. This cannot be allowed to become the norm. Because once it does, you will own nothing. You will have no rights to anything that you purchase. And we've already seen this even with cars at this point, where you have to purchase a subscription service to the car that you purchased in order to get better gas mileage, for Christ's sake, or to get more power out of it, or whatever upgrade they offer you with the subscription service to the vehicle you bought. And people are accepting this insanity as if it's okay. It's not okay. There is nothing okay about it. It is wrong in every sense of the imagination. But until people stand up against it and say this is unacceptable, it will continue to get worse. And this type of behavior will become the norm across the board in everything.
Be a mightier leader as King Solomon himself.
Malik! The sands disappeared as if the storm had never happened, though it left its mark in the crumbling stone of the palace walls. I found the sword where it had fallen from Ratasha's body. The metal was cold in my hands. I spoke Razia's name, but there was no answer. I returned the sword to the underground city. It seemed right that Razia should be left in the city she called home. And I could not bear to keep the sword with me. With the city secure in the hands of Malik's advisors, I begin the most difficult task of all. I must return to Babylon to tell our father what has happened.
Anyway, that's my rant for the day. I hope that you enjoy the rest of yours. If you could hit the like, subscribe, rumble, follow buttons, all that does help. And I will talk to you later.